What is going on, Brooklyn Net fans? Hello, everyone, and welcome back into another edition of the Brooklyn Boys Show right here on this Monday afternoon, July 7th, 2025. I appreciate you all tuning in. Make sure you smash that like button and hit subscribe on your way into the building. It's completely free, and it really does help us grow significantly here on the channel. Like I said, can't thank you all guys enough for tuning in right here on this Monday afternoon, and I am honored to be joined by a very special guest right here on the program. It is none other than ESPN NBA veteran reporter Tim MacMahon, who's kind enough to grace us with his presence on the show. Tim, really appreciate you fitting me into your schedule, and how you doing?
Howdy, partner. It's good to be here. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. I am super happy you are able to be here. I know we were talking before the show. Obviously, things are so hectic in the NBA, especially this time of year with the back end of free agency still going on, summer league just kicking off in a few days. And then you look up and the NBA season starting in just a few months. But I want to go back to a little under 2 weeks ago, the NBA draft, the first round just 12 days ago. And the Nets had all 5 first-round picks entering the night. They decided to utilize all 5 of their first-round picks, which was viewed as a bit of a surprise from a fan's perspective, given the fact that it's never been done in NBA history. And there were talks of the Nets looking to trade up, maybe trading Cam Johnson on draft night. That ultimately didn't happen, and the Nets utilized all 5 of their first-round picks. Tim, what was it like around the league when the Nets utilized all 5 of their first-round picks? Was it a surprise? Was it expected? What was the kind of assumption around the league entering draft night with the Nets?
Yeah, I think mildly surprising, just because it's difficult to fit 5 rookies onto the roster, but it's a clear indication that it is a long-term plan in Brooklyn. It's not going to be like a rushed rebuild. They're trying to get this thing right and have something that'll be sustainable for the long haul. And, look, I don't know how many of those rookies are going to get significant minutes this year. It might be all of them. It'll certainly be at least a few of them. And that's obviously not a recipe to win a lot of games next season, which that's okay, because they're likely to get another, early swing in the lottery next season and build it up from there. So, and honestly, rushing a rebuild for the Nets, I don't think is a good idea. I do think the patient approach is the wise approach. It's just not necessarily the most exciting approach right now. And, as you know, they did end up trading Cam Johnson for Michael Porter Jr., which essentially was a deal where they agreed to take on a much larger salary for a somewhat similar player, but a much larger salary. And they got a heck of an asset for doing so. That 2032 Denver pick, that's post Joker's prime. Obviously, that has a chance to be a very valuable pick. It was certainly an asset that had value around the league. And again, I think that's another indication that they're taking a very big picture, long term view in their approach to building the roster.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a team right now that's coming off a season where they won, under 30 games. This is a team that I completely agree with what you said. They're going to take kind of a long-term approach here. And I think a piece that has a player that has an opportunity to stay in Brooklyn for a long time, but his status is currently up in the air. That's Cam Thomas. We've heard there's not much of a market for Cam Thomas right now in free agency. He's currently a restricted free agent. My question to you, Tim, is what's really the holdup with Cam Thomas? Why hasn't he been back in Brooklyn?
I would say Cam Thomas wants to be paid, and apparently the Nets aren't too eager to pay him. I think that's probably the simplified view of that whole situation. And he's a pretty polarizing player around the league. The guy obviously can score, like he can get buckets. Can he contribute to winning? I think is a big question around the league. My guess is that he is back in Brooklyn when next season starts. Probably not on a long-term deal. I think there might be kind of a compromise between the parties where He's back, and it's more of a short-term situation to allow him to get out into the unrestricted free agency market at some point in the not too distant future. Um, but if they were eager to commit to him, well, I shouldn't say that because I think that if they were really eager to commit to him, it would be done already. Um, there are situations where the maybe the money can be so far apart in terms of what a player wants, what a franchise sees you that there's uh, a little bit of a delay. But I don't know that Cam Thomas is going to be part of the next good Nets team, is the way I would put it.
What do you think his value is on a contract for like an AAV, for example? Do you think it's $13 million a year? Do you think it's $15 million a year? What do you think Cam Thomas's value is as a player, and how is that viewed around the league?
I don't think it's that high. I think he ultimately, for a good team, is a bucket getter off the bench. Um, you know, it's different points in their career, obviously, but D'Angelo Russell just got the taxpayer mid level. I don't think that Cam Thomas is a player who people look at as like a full mid level or much less more than that. Again, I don't think that he would agree with that assessment, but I don't think he's a guy who would be considered a foundation piece for a lot of franchises around the league.
I agree. I don't think he's a foundation piece. I don't think Cam Thomas is a player who you can solely build your roster around. And you mentioned it. He doesn't really do much other than get buckets and score. But I mean, scoring is still a valuable asset in today's NBA. I know it's great to have a do-it-all point guard who could rebound for you, who can get you 3-4 assists a night. But the ability that Cam Thomas brings to the table where he can shoot the ball from anywhere on the court, where he can get a bucket when you need it, he can get you 23, 25 points per game, in my opinion, on a fully healthy season. I think there's still value to that. And if I had to make a prediction right now, I think Cam Thomas is back on this team on a cheap 1-year deal, a 1-year $12 million deal, 1-year $15 million deal, somewhere in that range. Then we're having the same conversation next offseason, except I think he's most likely going to be an unrestricted free agent next offseason. I think if the Nets were really enamored with Cam Thomas, they would have banged this extension out the start of the offseason. I mean, Cam Thomas has been with the Nets for 3 years. They haven't really shown that they're in love with who he is as a player. There were games, especially under head coach Jacques Vaughn, where he'd score 40 points, then we wouldn't even see him the next game. They don't really advertise him much as the star player on this team. I just don't think there's that much love for the net from the Nets organization with Cam Thomas. So I do ultimately think he's back. I think he's back on a 1-year deal, and he hits the open market next offseason. That's the risk, though, on bringing him back on only a 1-year deal, because you bring him back on a 1-year, $13 million deal. He plays 70 games this season, and he's able to average 23 points per game. He's walking next offseason and getting, in my opinion, which would look like a pretty significant contract because you didn't want to commit to him long term. That's the way I view it, Tim. I mean, if he's able to stay healthy and get you 25 points per game, do you think his value changes?
I really don't, because he's not a well-rounded player. He's not a guy who makes his teammates better. He's not a guy who makes a positive impact on the defensive end. I think you can compare him to a guy like Colin Sexton early in his career in Cleveland, where he ended up being part of the Donovan Mitchell sign and trade, so he got himself a pretty nice second contract. But even though Sexton had produced and put up decent scoring numbers over the last few years, the Jazz just had to include a second round pick to trade him for a overpaid backup center. I just don't think players like that have a whole lot of value around the league. And honestly, I I think you're probably overselling what the market would be for Cam Thomas next summer. Maybe I'll end up being proven wrong, but if I'm sitting in Sean Mark's chair, like the threat of losing Cam Thomas is not something that's of huge concern for me, because again, I don't think he's going to be one of the leading scorers probably, but can he be a leading scorer on a good team? I'm not convinced of that. I don't believe the Nets or anybody else in the league is convinced of that. So if Cam Thomas ends up somewhere else next summer, that's a risk I can live with.
Someone who's able to contribute in multiple areas of the game is Jonathan Kuminga. Like Cam Thomas, he's currently a restricted free agent. We've heard the talks of a potential sign and trade with Golden State signing him and then dishing him out elsewhere. The Nets were listed by The Athletic as a suitor for Kuminga. Tim, based on what you're hearing, are the Nets really involved in these Jonathan Kuminga sweepstakes?
If they are, it's not very aggressive, that's for sure. I would say the same thing about Miami. It sounds like Sacramento's probably been the most aggressive, but I don't think they're exactly going all out to try to make this happen. Kuminga's one of the biggest question marks,
Yep.
of the rest of the summer here. Him and Josh Giddey in Chicago to a certain degree, but you know, Chicago is probably going to end up keeping Josh Giddey. There's a clear role for him. He's their starting point guard. This guy's going to have the ball in his hands the most often. The Warriors might end up keeping Kuminga, but there's not a clear role for him. And if the Warriors end up keeping Kuminga, it's because there really weren't, suitable or reasonable options to get any kind of value for him right now. Yeah, and look, Steve Kerr's made it clear, not necessarily through words, but through actions. He's not a big Kuminga fan,
Yep.
right? And he certainly doesn't think he's a good fit with Steph and with Jimmy Butler. So should Kuminga stay in Golden State, which at this point, I think it's probably a flip of the coin type of deal. I would look for that to be on a short-term deal with, at a decent number, probably not quite the Jalen Green number that he got from Houston, south of that, but essentially he would be a human trade exception in some senses, a guy that you're looking to trade and get value for sooner than later. Now, the trick there is if you're going to have him, say it's a $20 million salary and you're going to have him on the roster and you're hoping to trade him at the deadline, probably has to play.
Oh,
Prob
absolutely. Yeah.
probably has to get minutes, which again is something that Steve Kerr, I mean, just the guy was DNP-CD in the playoffs until Steph Curry got hurt. So that right now the Kuminga situation looks to be one where there's no good immediate solutions, and it might just that relationship with the Warriors might just have to continue and just kind of be an inconvenient situation for both sides because Kuminga clearly considers himself a primary offensive player, a guy who should be getting shots, obviously should be getting minutes. His coach is not aligned with that. And so, but right now there's not like Brooklyn hasn't been aggressive. Miami hasn't been aggressive. Again, Sacramento is kind of floating around, but it doesn't look like there's a clear, obvious solution this summer there.
Kuminga's a really interesting player because he's a guy who still has all the upside in the world, despite being in the league for a few years now. I mean, I think Kuminga could develop into a really stout defender. He's already shown the ability to guard multiple positions at this level. I think he developed into an okay scorer. I think the goal with Jonathan Kuminga is to get to a point in his career where he's giving you 15, 8, and 8 a night. And I think that's possible, but you're betting on upside solely with Kuminga.
15, 8, and 8 what? Assists? He's not gonna have 8
Well,
assists in a
15,
month.
like 15, 8, and 4, like so somewhere in that range. 15, 8, and 8 is more like what you want from Josh Giddey. That's what I was thinking there. Like that's
I would say that the upside of Kuminga is more like 28 and 2.
yeah,
He's
something
he's never he's not a guy. He's a phenomenal athlete, great size, athleticism. He's not a guy who has a lot of feel for the game. And that's where, Kerr struggles to say, look, if the ball's going to be in Steph's hands and Jimmy Butler's hands, this isn't a guy who's got a lot of feel. He's not a connector. So how does he fit in that puzzle? And, then the question with guys like Kuminga is, okay, is he good enough to be one of your top 2 or 3 guys? Because if not, then he's probably kind of a, 15, 20-minute per game guy off the bench because again, if you're not going to be a primary guy, you've got to be a guy who can, fit around the primary guys, be a complementary player, and he has not shown the ability or eagerness to be a complementary player.
exactly. And again, it just goes back to the whole point that you're betting on upside. Like this is what Kuminga signs is going to be a pretty significant deal compared to what he's actually shown on the court as an NBA player. I mean, do you believe the contract's in the range of 4 years, $100 million, whether it's a sign and trade or whether he signs somewhere else? You think it's $20 million a year, which we've been hearing a lot?
I don't think it'll be 4 years, and I don't think it'll be 25 per. I think it'll be
We got you
south
there,
on
Tim?
yeah, you hear? Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
sorry, I think
think
you cut out for a second.
yeah, I don't think it'll be 4 years, and I don't think it'll be 25 million a year. I don't think he's gonna get either of those numbers.
Okay, so do you think this is more of a short-term deal that you're looking at with Kaminga, maybe like 2 for 30 in that range?
Yeah, maybe a little bit higher than that, but probably again, right now, I think the most likely scenario is that he ends up staying with the Warriors on a short-term deal with everybody involved hoping that he's moved by the trade deadline.
I want to get into the 7-team trade that was, officially confirmed yesterday and officially went through. The Nets added 2 second-round picks as one of the 7 teams in that deal. It all started from the Kevin Durant trade. Then it blossomed into this historic thing with 7 teams officially being involved at the end. How did this trade unfold, Tim? What was the thought process behind this, and what really went into making it a 7-team deal?
Yeah, and it's a lot like the 6-team trade last year that started with Klay Thompson going to the Mavericks in a sign and trade, and then there's just so much time you just build things out from there. Really, what these are I'd have to look at it, but I think 5 or 6 separate trades that teams just found a way to kind of link together just for tiny kind of around the margin type of benefits. But for Houston, being able to connect all these things allowed them to bring in Clint Capella. So that, that's the benefit of that. Again, this is not a deal. This is the Kevin Durant trade, and then a bunch of unrelated trades that were tied together more so than like you didn't have 7 general
Yeah.
managers on a conference call, working these things out. It's just, when there's a trade of that size and then there's that much time before it can become official, you're going to have other things that can be linked into it. And again, teams can get, sometimes it's just, a little bit of cash. Sometimes it's, a slot to be able to sign a player like Capella, but you're going to get little advantages on the margins by being able to tie all these things together.
I want to go back to the Nets and talk about someone who was really the main focus for the Nets last offseason, that being Nic Claxton. Signed a huge 4-year, $100 million contract with the team. 1 year in, he hadn't really lived up to the expectations. I mean, this was a guy 2 years ago who was viewed as a defensive player of the year candidate, one of the better defensive centers in the league. Last year, he took a strong step back, struggled defensively, couldn't really get in the groove offensively. We all know Nic Claxton isn't a strong shooter by any measure, but really wasn't able to get you a double-double a night, which he was pretty much able to do consistently just 2 seasons ago. Tim, do the Nets have any interest in dealing Nic Claxton? I know the suitors have been kind of going off the table, first with the Lakers signing DeAndre Ayton just a few years ago. But from the Nets' perspective, do they have any interest in moving on from Claxton?
I mean, what's the offer? I don't think there, by any stretch of the imagination is Nic Claxton untouchable. But I don't get the sense that they're eager to move off of him either. And like Nic Claxton's offensive production is probably going to be pretty directly associated with the quality of point guard or pick and roll partner that he's playing with, right? I mean, he's not, you're not dumping him the ball down on the block. He's not going to create his own offense. He's not a stretch player. He's going to be a guy that's a lob finisher. That's a rebounder. That's a putback guy. And if you put him, say this Russian kid that they drafted, I believe with their first pick of the first round, say he develops into the kind of pick and roll playmaker that people think he might be, then Claxton's going to look a lot better. And it's honestly, it's really hard to evaluate a that type of big man when he's in the kind of situation that Claxton was in last year, where we all understand the goal of the Brooklyn Nets was not to win as many games as possible. It's kind of a mishmash type of roster. In a lot of ways, it's like Walker Kessler with the Utah Jazz. But I'm a Claxton fan. I do believe he's a guy who can help a good team win. And he's young enough to where, that might end up being in Brooklyn down the road. Again, I think if Brooklyn wanted to trade Claxton, they could. But I don't think moving him unless it's a really good return makes a lot of sense for the Nets.
What is the value right now for Nic Claxton on the trade market? Are you looking at like one first round pick? I've seen a bunch of when the Lakers were involved in the trade talks, the main package that I saw, I think, was Maxi Kleber, Gabe Vincent, and their 2032 unprotected first round pick. What do you think the trade value is right now for a guy like Claxton if the Nets, Sean Marks woke up today and decided he wanted to move him?
I mean, that kind of a deal, which again, I don't know if that's a good enough return. I guess it depends on what the quality of the first round pick would be. The Lakers on the trade that they ended up backing out of had a first round pick and a swap for Mark Williams with Dalton Connect in the deal. I think Claxton's as valuable, if not more so, than a Mark Williams. But again, I just don't think it makes sense for the Nets to like. There's no reason to be eager to move on from a young big who has shown some potential.
Tim, really appreciate you sparing some time and joining us right here on the Brooklyn Boys Show. You want to share any final thoughts here before we wrap the show up?
I would just encourage Nets fans to be patient. Certainly, they will have an opportunity to be aggressive bidders in free agency over the next couple of years, if they so choose. But this is the kind of season where you're watching young guys and hoping to see glimpses and flashes of promise and potential and development. And you're also checking out Tankathon on a pretty regular basis.
Tim, really appreciate you joining us. Really appreciate you sparing some time. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. You can find Tim and his incredible work on ESPN.com and at ESPN_MacMahon on all social media. Like I said, appreciate you tuning in. Smash that like button, hit subscribe. Thank you for joining us here on the show. He's Tim MacMahon, and I am your host, Connor Long, signing off right here on the Brooklyn Boys Show. Have a great day, everyone. And as always, go Nets.